You know, I think it's a very normal thing to be sort of scared of a window at night. Mostly because you can't really see far. You see the black and you see the reflection of what is inside the house. So it's half a mirror and half a window out into the darkness. And any movement that isn't your own can be counted as something watching, whether inside the house or outside. Visions. Now, I wanted to take some time apart from the fiction. I have a couple more, actually, I have a lot more stories to do as far as recording the fictional stories. But I wanted to take some time apart from that to make this video about what inspires these stories. Here I'll elaborate my motives and perhaps a little bit of history on my experiences with the genre of horror, I should say. That's the genre I'm attempting to write. And as you may have noticed, the stories are hit or miss. Some more rewarding than others. Some with maybe less likable characters than others. But you know, an amateur is at work when you see hit or miss, so guess I'm doing okay. Either way, I wrote this piece called Visions. Now, I wrote the first part before I wrote the second. I wrote the second part before I wrote the first part. And it's a little bit backwards, but I put the second thing I wrote before the first part I wrote because it does seem like a good way to open it. So we'll start off with part 2. This kind of reads like an essay, so just warning you. Sometimes I reckon the human eye, being so interconnected with the brain, which is controlled by your feelings and gut bacteria, can conjure up pretty much any image possible. Whether it's a grim reaper, a shadow man, a nicely dressed aggressive man with green skin, or even a pale face you just noticed looking out your dark closet at night. Heck, we see things in the night sky like UFOs, and we see things in the night forest like Bigfoot, sea monsters in lakes, and so on. The nighttime house is not an exception. It's not much different. Now, the house can be any old house, any house with a fabled line of stories, or it's a house with a family who's lived there at any time. Perhaps it's a house that's had several families who's lived there. Now, ghosts can be flashes of people walking by, and perhaps it's the brain remembering the busyness of the day, hearing sounds of babies crying or a woman humming a tune. Sometimes we even hear machinery and beeping from our jobs as we lie in our beds at night. Now, the brain, being a tricky little blob of neurons, can misfire. Some brains do this more than others, and it's not necessarily a sign of damage, nor is it a sign of some kind of supernatural skill. It's just a thing that seems to happen in some brains more often. However, most people's brains seem to operate normally, and they live a life with maybe just 2 weird experiences like this, and usually they're able to explain it as a memory echo, as I have explained, to be a mere imprint on the eyes and ears and brain, repeating an image or sound or both of something it's either seen before or perhaps it's imagining it in real time. Now, I'm no expert, nor do I know any fancy names related to these phenomena, nor do I understand hallucinations and their types and origin. After seeing grim reapers and dooming visions of fire and monks in a work camp of some sort, I also heard voices in my childhood, which is unique but not unheard of for a deaf kid, no pun intended. Accompanying these times of voices and seeing what is commonly referred to as shadow entities, there was a lack of the hallucinated music. No more choirs or symphonies. Just people who would disappear from your peripheral vision as you turned to look at them. Or doors that would move and have shadows hiding behind them. Was this all the warning sign that I was going to be a schizophrenic? Was it me grieving my sister's death? Was I processing other traumas that I hadn't really put much thought to? Now, these questions are probably worth asking, but let us also not forget that from both sides of my southern-based family came stories and the love for the art of storytelling. My uncles and aunts and cousins are all readers and storytellers, along with my mother and anyone I've really met on her side. And then the grandparents I had on my father's side had a whole library as well, but also an oral tradition like my uncles and aunts had on my mother's side. They told me tales about their family history, local folklore, ancient and new, along with their associated myths and legends, some urban, some rural. My granny, who grew up Jewish, told me her people came from Israel. It's a myth from the Old Testament that a lot of Christian and Jewish families seem to sort of take half-heartedly as they read it. She really has UK and some Eastern European blood, if I'm not mistaken, but we are not Israelites. We are not God's people. But I am reminded by this example how powerful the belief is and how it can manifest into our day-to-day realities. Everyone on my mom's side and everyone on my dad's side, and a lot of people I've met throughout life, has a ghost story of some kind. And perhaps it's that old universal tradition of storytelling, generation by generation, neighbor to neighbor, which manifests in our imagination when we hear the tales and come up behind us unexpectedly when we're in that state of neuron misfire or high stress or even falling asleep. The shadow entities were not confined to my childhood home in Ashland City or my second home later in my teens in Pleasant View. They have been everywhere I've lived long term or even staying the night somewhere. It's very rare for me to experience these guys in a public place during the day. However, there was once a time I was in a mall on a Friday with very few people, oddly enough, and it was rare to see that, and it kind of got spooky. First, my girlfriend at the time and I got separated, and we got lost down a weird part of a mall that wasn't even open. Then we found each other, and I had told her of the shadow people. They were darting like tree frogs from wall to wall. It was a creepy place for such a beautiful late summer afternoon outside. More recently, A friend and I were chilling in the woods maybe a few months ago. She and her fiance and I were hanging out, swapping stories, and he had gone inside to get something, perhaps a glass of water or to use the bathroom. And his wife and I heard movement when had been gone for about a couple minutes, and there was a sound that was distinctly described by both of us to sound like a person moving through the woods on the other side of the fence. We later decided it was an owl, but the flood of chemicals that went through our brain and nervous system seemed to alert our natural defenses. She went inside, I believed, and I remained behind a bit, kind of enjoying the excitement of fear because I'm sick in the head like that. I was all jokey, spooky, hunky-dory at first, till the sound of the movement repeated, and a small mumble of the creature, human or not, was sounded again, and I will admit I began to get up and leave as well, as I didn't want whatever it was to be near me. Be it a man who found his way through the outskirt of the city's woods, coming up on the poorly designed fence and the trees near our apartment complex, or be it some animal. I'm more scared of the human than the animal, because the animal will most likely avoid you, and you'll be disillusioned from any fear the sounds that the creature makes. Oh, it's just an owl. As you see a beautiful winged bird of prey swoop its wings up and perch up high up above. But the mystery of the noise is what drives the fear element. What is it? Who is it? And should we remain here in these urban woods alone? Survival is good to have. Now think of it in terms of the black window. It's dark outside. The lights are on in the kitchen. You look out the window as best as you can, but mostly you see a reflection of what lies inside your home. Now you imagine if I put my face right up to the window, I can see a little further outside, not much. But what if right outside my line of vision, a face appears right in front of mine? It's just this window pane between us. What if this face is pale and gruesome? You back away from the window so you don't just hallucinate it all, but you do notice a small movement. But it's not coming from outside, no. There's a face in the pantry behind you, smiling ghoulishly. And this causes quite a panic, but you turn around quickly to see it's just the arrangement of colored boxes and cans, making an uncanny face that will be found if sought after. Perhaps, after all, it was just the shadow of your roommate's cat. It can be likened to the same uncanny feeling of discovering a giant spider in your shirt after you've taken it off to take a shower. How long had the hideous but beautiful creature been crawling or lingering with its 8 legs and eyes and its fangs on your body, in your hair? Another example of this is in many urban legends. The most famous one is of the babysitter. A babysitter gets a call. The creepy voice says, "I'm coming to get you." The babysitter shrugs it off as a prank caller. She puts on a movie for the kids. They're eating popcorn and watching the television. Then comes another phone call. The babysitter is obligated to answer what was at the time a landline phone, and the only option for the parents to reach their child's temporary custodian. The creepy voice answers back again. I'm coming to get you. Ha ha ha. She hangs up mad at what is probably the prank call. But this happens multiple times. And each time the creepy voice is sounding more angry and sinister, giving details he could not give. The babysitter gets worried. She calls the cops. They trace all calls in the last hour, and it takes time. Soon the babysitter gets a call back from the creepy voice. I'm coming to get you and the children. The babysitter hangs up and the phone rings again. What? She cries, frustrated. Ma'am, we just traced that call. It's coming from inside the house. You need to get the kids and get out now. An officer is on the way. She rushes out with the kids in a panic. They get as far from the house on the long driveway to see a silhouette of a man in the lit room, one of the kids' rooms upstairs, looking at them from out the window. Now, the fear placed in me after hearing a few versions of this story as a child was enough to give me nightmares for weeks. But the stories were too fun to pass up. The movie The Sixth Sense and the backstory that inspired it, the plot, has a similar fear of feeling violated unknowingly. The spider in your shirt, the man in your house, the imagined faces looking into your window as the dark night eludes much of what you can see. These are all the brain at work. It's creative. It's building up your senses of survival and logical thinking. It gets your adrenaline up and disturbs your sleep. But the art of telling ghost stories and scary legends will persist as long as humankind is around. Now I gotta go. The roommate's kids are at their grandparents', and for some reason I see a tall figure standing in their room. I've heard him knocking around in there, but I've been too scared to really give him a good look. I've no idea who he is or where he comes from. I was gonna write about the basement, but that's a story for another hour, perhaps another night in the dark, listening to coyotes and owls and forest hobos hoot and holler. Alright, Visions Part 1, as I did it backwards. There was once a time I went with my mom and my Aunt Barbara to help my grandpa, who died a little later when I was 12. So this incident had to be when I was between 7 or 9. Now there was nobody else there, just the four of us, me, my mother, her twin sister, and their father. He had dementia and couldn't take care of himself. I remember wandering around the house and hearing sounds and seeing people like it was a party of some kind. I was looking for my mom, and there was a set of stairs that I followed. I can't remember if they went up or down, just that they went into a garage. I remember vividly seeing more people in the garage and saw a man with green skin. It was the oddest thing. He had red eyes, red lips, but green skin. He had on a fedora and a nice tan suit. He immediately saw me and started shouting, You let kids run around here. Get out while you can, little mister." And he was waving a finger and starting like he wanted to run towards me and grab me, but I remember running back to the wooden stairs that led me in there and back into Grandpa's house. No one was around. I began to cry as I had been terribly frightened. Later on, I found my mom and my aunt, who kind of laughed off the idea of a green man with red eyes in a suit. It is an absurd idea after all. When I was even younger, maybe 4 or 5, my sister was away somewhere, either sick or just not in this memory for some reason. My dad was still around, so I could have been 6 at the oldest. Now, our house was on a steep hill in the hilly outskirts of Ashland City, Tennessee. Just a couple 100 acres of forest that went uphill and downhill into a forested valley. It turned into a limestone rock quarry not too far from an abandoned railroad track and the city dump. Our house was smack dab in the middle of this forest on the top of a hill. In hindsight, it was a magical place to explore as a child, and I'm forever grateful I grew up there. And I do have this crazy idea of buying all the property on that hill when I'm rich one day. But there's a lot of work to do if I'm going to be rich one day. The forest had its faces, and it also had its creatures that you can't recognize. But these were all gone in an instant. It had the sounds of singing that could be heard in the distance. And I've met many people in the forest who never actually existed there, at least to my knowledge. One day I was roaming around the house as a young boy, age 4 to 6 does. I may have been looking for my sister or mother. I found the end of the kitchen and stared out a window. However, there had been no window there, just a door that led to the creepy dark basement that I could write a whole book about and probably will someday. My dad spent most of his time in the basement working and tinkering on little projects, mostly his model train set that he was reluctant to let anyone else see. So the first weird thing when I look back on this memory, it seemed a little mundane, is that there is no window there. And if there was, it would look uphill into the forest. There's no window in this part of the kitchen, just a door. Yet, I vividly remember looking out a window, and I saw a valley below our house and smoldering fire, with several rows of hooded chained men carrying things in a line back and forth. Soon my dad put his hand on my shoulder and he smiled at me. I look back at the window and it's just a door again. He opens the door and goes down to the basement. And that's the end of that memory. And it's one that's kind of stuck around. I mean, it's kind of hard to forget. Before that, my twin sister and I were about 4 years old. And we were inseparable. Nothing tore us apart. Not even petty sibling fights. Now, we had 2 beds. One was a race car bed, and another was a princess bed. Our beds ran against the wall into the corner. Hers faced the door and the corner behind it. Mine faced the corner and the opposite wall behind it. One day, something moved in So one day something was moving in the closet, and we were too terrified to go check it out. I think Barbara, my sister, got brave enough to go look when soon a skeleton's hand reached out and opened the closet door, and a grim reaper-like creature was climbing up and down our wall rapidly with otherworldly spider speed, but a ghost-like movement as its black cloak trailed behind it. I opened the door and a bigger one came in our room. My sister Barbara and I held each other tight, screaming and crying. It was the most terrifying moment of our lives. I remember Barbara finally got the courage to leave the room and get our parents, but I was still paralyzed with fear, screaming and crying. I remember holding on to my sister's Barbie doll for comfort, hoping she would come back and take me with her. And those hooded skeletons glided about our bedroom, terrorizing me. Now we will fast forward about 10 years, and my sister has been dead for about 4 years at this point. It's just me and my mother living in Pleasant View, Tennessee, one town over. I'm on this new drug for a serious extreme skin condition, and at the time it had not been banned yet, and it did have some serious side effects like extreme depression and psychosis, and I did experience a bit of both. However, when I was 14, one Grim Reaper came back. He was a taller Grim Reaper who had no skeleton-like properties, just red eyes, and he gave me the feeling that I was about to die, or that something terrible was about to happen. I was experiencing sleep paralysis because this drug I was on caused extreme dehydration and the psychosis that we had been warned about. The Grim Reaper stood at the edge of my bed and came closer and closer up to my side near the bedroom window. When I finally screamed and forced myself painfully out of the sleep paralysis, I turned on the light, ran to the bathroom to wash off my face and dry my body down from the cold sweats. I bent down, threw some cold water onto my face. When I looked up at the mirror, I saw my eyes had been beyond bloodshot red and full of blood, and that there were beings behind me, shadow figures. I still can't really remember because I felt like I was about to have a heart attack, and I turned on all the lights on that side of the house. I talked to my best friend from middle school, who we still talk to today, on MySpace instant messaging, and we talked till the sun came up. He could tell I was severely troubled. Now we'll fast forward once again when I was age 23, when I moved back to Pleasant View, because I was having a year-long nervous breakdown, which prompted a week-long stay at the Nut House. I believed at the time that my family was trying to kill me, that the government believed me to have committed serious crimes against the state. I had heightened state of alertness, but also couldn't really understand or communicate well, as my brain jumbled up everything. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I don't know how long. But the Grim Reaper was back. Except this time, it had bent down to give me the kiss of death. I was about to let it as my chest began to hurt. I believed I was having a heart attack. My breathing was all erratic, and nobody believes I had a heart attack and said I probably just had a panic attack after a bad dream. Yet I remember it very well. I was awake on a nice fancy leather recliner set my mom and stepdad bought around that time, and I was watching the movie Fantasia for the millionth time, finding too much meaning and symbolism in it that didn't make sense, and my speech had become word salads. My mother and stepfather and my uncle couldn't make sense of me. I was having a paranoid breakdown of the worst kind. I was ready to kill myself before the proverbial they, whoever that is, would do the job. Then after came just hallucinations of music. After years of trial and error of medications, voices seemed to go away, paranoia too, but music remained. Symphonies and very choral-like music filled my ears during the most intense and some of the most mediocre moments as well. That is, till many years later, I fell into a slump. I had fallen in love with the wrong person. We lived together for a year. She was bad for me, I was bad for her. And to top things off, we drank a gallon of rum and snorted a gram of coke almost every night for a whole year. I found myself one night doing a gram and a half of coke by myself, as she had gone off to sort out some affair. I was by myself, and I had trouble breathing, chest pains, and it had been 7 years since my breakdown. I found myself looking up at the Grim Reaper again, who once again bent down to kiss me. But one of her dogs that I was babysitting chased it away and barked at it. Then the dog came and slept with me on the couch the rest of the night. I was missing home. I was missing myself. I was mad that I had spent all that money and gotten that high. I was mad that no matter how high I got, it did not cure heartbreak. It took me a while later to fully quit cocaine and heavily drinking, and even now, as I speak, I celebrate 18 months of no cocaine. I can go back to this succession of events and just really wonder how I survived all these without going completely nuts, or worse, dead. But paranoid schizophrenia is no joke. Cocaine and alcohol are no cure. And if we're being honest, no drug is to cure. Thankfully, I'm on legal psychiatric drugs that are a miracle cure cocktail, and I've never experienced adverse effects from THC, except for maybe eating too much and falling asleep. But a lot of these experiences have come through in my writing. I don't write horror or dark material to be edgy or cool. I don't do it to impress anybody or make them feel any certain way. And if I do try to make someone feel a certain way, it's just through the lens of my own human experience. I write this stuff because I process death in a weird way. Being creative with drawing or writing or music, it's my grief processing tools that help me make sense out of things that don't make sense. Now, I could go on about every single unexplainable thing I've seen and heard throughout my whole life, but I think I'll minimize it to a book about the basement, as I mentioned earlier. That can be a whole book. And it'll probably be a fictional book based off a real basement, based off some embellished real stories. I don't think I'll tell the real story because I could do that in one swoop with 2,000 words. I could do that, but I do have a premise for a novel set in my childhood basement growing up, and I won't say much about it because I don't like spoilers myself. But I have given you some basic facts, and I hope you enjoyed this YouTube channel as I post sometimes sinister tales and sometimes goofy tales and all the things in between, exciting and mediocre. Trying my best to be less mediocre, and well, that involves surrendering certain stories to the file, the junk drawer. It's hard to do. Sometimes you're like, well, I could make a video out of this, and that's my project of the week. But instead, I decided it was more pertinent to share with you the inspiration behind the dark tales, so to speak, or even a lot of my creative ventures, macabre or not. So please feel free to enjoy the dark tales, the secrets of the ferns, and you can ignore all the older videos because those are failed attempts at being a documentarian. And yeah, feel free in the comments below to give me your ghost story. I would love to hear them. Who knows? They might inspire a novel. For you or for me, who knows? Creativity is sometimes found in the graveyard.